Good morning and welcome to an introduction to MACRIS Maps. My name is Amory Gundel. I'm the GIS manager for the Massachusetts Historical Commission. And today I'm looking forward to introducing the basics of MACRIS Maps and sharing tips on how to utilize our data for historic preservation planning activities. And we'll start off with a very brief introduction to MACRIS and MACRIS Maps. So I'd like to highlight that MACRIS and MACRIS Maps are two different websites. MACRIS, for anyone not familiar with it, is the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. It's a database with data compiled from a variety of records and files maintained by the Massachusetts Historical Commission, including but not limited to the Inventory of Historic Assets of the Commonwealth, the National Register of Historic Places, the State Register of Historic Places listings, and local historic district study reports. So this includes information on above-ground historic inventory in Massachusetts, such as buildings, cemeteries, structures, and historic districts. MACRIS Maps is a supplement to the MACRIS database. It's an online mapping application that allows users to search the MACRIS database by location for information on the state's documented cultural resources. Last summer, we updated MACRIS Maps with an entirely new look and somewhat different operation and workflow. So I'll begin today with a walkthrough of the new MACRIS Maps website. So when MACRIS Maps first loads, it brings you to our Welcome and Terms of Agreement page. And what I would like to highlight most here is that users should keep in mind that the absence of MHC data for a MACRIS Maps location does not necessarily imply a lack of a historic resource, only that information for that location is not presently on file with the MHC. So if you're browsing a town and you're noticing an empty space, there's no MHC data on the map, it doesn't mean there's no historic resources there. It just means that no record of them exists at present at the MHC. So once you accept the terms, it will bring you to the MACRIS Maps page. And so we'll start off today with just a brief overview of where things are located on the site with the new user interface. And then we'll dive into examples of how to do searches and then also different tips on how to use the site for your preservation planning activities. So we'll start with arguably the most important part of MACRIS Maps, which is the map itself. And so when the page opens, you're at what we call 0% zoom. So you'll be able to see the entire state of Massachusetts. To zoom in, you have a few different options. You can use the buttons in the top corner. The plus will zoom you in, the minus will zoom you out. You can also use this bar here and select how far in you would like to go, with the bottom being 0% zoom. You see the whole state of Massachusetts, and the top being 0%. So as zoomed in as you can get on the map. You also have the option of using the wheel on your mouse to scroll in and out. And when I use MACRIS Maps, that's what I find to be the easiest thing. So MACRIS Maps will show you two different MHC data layers. The first will appear at 40% zoom, and these are our inventory areas. And if you zoom in to 50%, you'll then see what we call our inventory points. And these are the buildings, structures, objects, and cemeteries. And if you zoom in to 90%, you'll be able to see the labels on the points. So if you're a little zoomed out browsing in a town, and without clicking, you just want to know more information about this point here, if you zoom in to 90%, you'll be able to see the label to know which points it is. And then the last thing that we want to show you with the map is you'll notice that when you highlight or when you hover, over the resource of interest, it will highlight to indicate what you're looking at. So points get a halo, and areas will turn a different color, and the outline will become a dashed line. And this is incredibly useful when you're in a place with a lot of inventory points, and it helps you to figure out which one that you would be clicking on. And one last thing with the map is in the bottom right corner, we also have a scale bar, so you'll be able to see feet and meters. If you click the eye, we also have attribution links. And we'll discuss this further later on, but there are different layers of data that you can add to the map to provide context for the MHC data. And if you have more questions about that, there will be links that will give you a little more information on how those layers were developed and where you can find them for yourself. So moving on from the map, we'll go to the top bar. And up here is a lot of the navigation and also different ways for you to personalize your MACRIS Maps experience. So we'll start off with the search ID. And the search ID is for folks who are familiar with MACRIS already and know exactly what resource of interest that they're looking for. And so if you know the MACRIS ID, you can type it here. And I will highlight in this search, I'm using lowercase letters. So the search is not case sensitive. You could do all capital letters, you could do a lowercase, you could do a mix. It will figure out what you're looking for and take you where you need to be. So I hit enter. You can also click search and it will bring you to your search. And it will center the search on the map. It will also highlight the feature that you searched for. So you'll see that ABI.1 has a halo around it. We also, more information has popped up on the screen. We now have a details panel here on the left with information about the resource. And then we also have what we call the grid here at the bottom. And we'll get into detail on these a little bit later in the presentation. So back up to the top bar, you'll see that you can clear selected features and measurements by clicking the X. And there are a lot of different buttons up top. And if you hover over them, they'll tell you exactly what they do. So if you're ever confused, just hover over the buttons and you'll know what you can find there. And next to the clear selected features and measurements button, we also have this button with the state of Massachusetts on it. And if you click this, it will reset your map back to that initial view and reset your search as well. And then another navigation tool that we have in the top bar that's new and we're very excited about is zoom to a town. And so if you click this, you'll see your options and we'll just start with going to Adams. And so you can open this and select the town you're interested in. And I do want to point out that if you're interested in a town that's further down the list, you don't have to scroll all the way down. You can start typing on your keyboard and it will take you where you want to go. And it might not be the first one that pops up, but it gets you close. And then either press enter or click your selection. And next in the top bar are those ways of personalizing your experience. So if you have a selection, you can show or hide the details panel. You can show or hide the grid. And if you're browsing and you want to be able to see just the map on your screen, you can even close the tools panel. And so then you're here and able to see more of what's available on the map. We also have the map legend. And the map legend will be helpful so that you can understand what the different colors mean on the map. And the colors are based on designation. So it could indicate that something is on the National Register, that it has a preservation restriction, that it's within a local historic district. And we'll dive into this further later on, but just so you know, you'll be able to find that legend up here. And we also have a code key. And so the database, we have our designations listed in code. And if you're not familiar with them, you can go to this code key and find them. So if you had not heard of an NHL before, you'll be able to see that NHL stands for National Historic Landmark. We also have a very fairly detailed help document. And you have two different options here. You can scroll through the pop-up to search for exactly what you're looking for, or you can download the document as a PDF, which is helpful because then you can have the PDF up on a separate window and you can alternate back and forth between the map and the help document. And then the last thing of interest up here in the top bar is about MACRIS Maps. And what's most important here is it will tell you when the maps data was last updated. So we last updated in August. We typically will update the data every 4 to 6 weeks. And if you want to check and see the last time we updated, just go to the About section. And we'll get the Tools panel back up over here. And so the last thing to show you before we dive into searches is over here in the layers. So once you're zoomed in town, like we are here, when you first open the page, you'll be able to see Bing Maps. However, we also provide a variety of different layers that can appear below the MHC inventory. So we have OpenStreetMaps. There's a lot, I won't go through all of them, but MassGIS provides color imagery and aerial imagery, which is great if you need some context there like that. They also provide LiDAR imagery, if that's something that you're looking for. In addition to the base layers, there are also quite a few overlay layers. And again, there are many. If you have questions about specific ones, feel free to ask in the Q&A and I can go into more detail. But a few things that are often used, especially here at MHC, we can load the assessor parcels, which is great. You can also load the building structures. So you'll be able to see the building structures, especially for some of the resources that we have. So you can play around with that. There's a variety of options. And now we'll just dive right into the searches. So again, you have your search by ID. If you already know what the ID is, you can go ahead and type it in and do your search. And the details panel will pop up with information about the resource of interest. And if a photo is available, it will display here at the top. If you click this link here, it will bring you to the MACRIS database. And so MACRIS Maps will provide you with some information that we have on file. So historic name, address, year of construction. But for the full complete record that we have, you'll want to click the link to go to the MACRIS database. And it's here that you can download the inventory form. And if there's a National Register form on file, that would be available for download as well. And there are a few helpful navigation pieces in the details panel as well that I'd like to call your attention to. So say that you're interested in what else is around ABI 1. Is this in South Abington? Is it in North Abington? You want more information. You can click and drag on the map, and that will allow you to pan around and see what else is in the area. You can zoom out as well. So it looks like it's southeast Abington. And you can click around, but say you got really far away, you didn't realize, how do you get back to the search that you were interested in? Well, first you can click center and you'll see your selection is still highlighted with the halo, but we're still pretty far out. You can also center and zoom right back in. So you have the ability to move around the map, but then return to your original search. We also have the option of Street View. And I do want to note that Street View is dependent on Google Maps. So if Google Maps has Street View, it will appear. But if it shows up as a black screen and nothing is loading, it means that Google Maps does not have imagery for the resource that you're trying to look at. And so again, you can clear your selected features and measurements. So not everyone comes to MACRIS Maps knowing exactly the resource that they're looking for. And that's where Zoom to a Town comes in, and it's great. So say we want to go to Amherst. Again, you can click and drag to move around the map just to see what's around. You can see that there's a lot of inventory recorded here, less inventory recorded in the south. A lot of the inventory is following the roads. So even just that visual assessment of where the inventory is can be helpful. And then also here is where we can pull up the map legend. You'll note that the points have different what we call symbology. And so if you're looking at a red circle, it means that that item is listed on the National Register. If you're just looking at a blue circle, it's included in the MHC's inventory. Triangles are local historic districts. Again, so you can have the legend up as you're moving around just to understand what you're seeing on the map. Say you know exactly what you're looking for. Instead of zooming to a town, you can search by address, and that would be over here in the tool panel. And with an address search, you can be as vague or as specific as you want. Our system is pretty smart. So say I'm looking for this address. You can either click enter or click search. And because this was a very specific address, it gives me that address right here. And if I click this link, it will take me to my address of interest. And you get this little pin to mark the address. The only way to clear the pin is to use this clear button here. Just keep that in mind. But say for some reason I knew I was looking for 37 Plymouth Street, but I wasn't sure which town the resource I was interested in is. If you search just an address, it will show you the first 10 options that are available. So maybe I didn't want the one in New Bedford. I actually wanted the one in Cambridge. And so it'll bring you to Cambridge and you can click through the different options. And in addition to searching by a specific address, you could also search for a landmark. There's no guarantee the landmark's there, but a lot of times the larger landmarks will be. So for example, we have Fenway. And that will take you, I guess I have to be more specific, Fenway Park. And that will take me right to Fenway Park. Or for example, we could go to Mount Greylock and it will recognize Mount Greylock. And this is another location where if you're looking for the street view of a specific address, you can type the address in, click street view. And this is pretty cool. You can actually see the top of Mount Greylock. So moving on, we'll go back to Amherst. And we'll dive in a little bit to the different tools and ways to navigate on the map. So there are two options in addition to the on the map options for zoom. If you know exactly the coordinates of the location you're trying to find, you can type them in and click zoom. Or if you're pretty zoomed out, but you know that this is your area of interest, if you click and hold and drag and then let go, the map will zoom you into the location that you had drawn. So that's just another zoom option. And then here is where the selection options come into play. So say I'm just curious about what's around town. I click and the resource information will pop up. And this is the default. When you log into MACRIS Maps, you are in select by click. And you can see this is where the hover comes in, hovering over the resources I'm interested in. And so that's the standard use. However, say I'm interested in more than one resource. So for example, I want to know what resources surrounds Pelham Road. So you can use what we call select by box, and you click, drag to the extent that you're interested in, and click again. And that is now your selection area. And this is where we'll call attention to the grid here at the bottom of the screen. So you have the option of expanding it so that you can see better. And in the grid, it will show you everything within your selection area. And we have them separated out by the layers that are available. So we have inventory points, and the 53 is telling you that there are 53 inventory points within the selection area that you drew. We also have inventory areas. So there are 4 inventory areas within your selection. And what's great about the grid is that as you scroll through, you can see everything that's in your selection, but you can also click them. And if you notice on the map, my halo is shifting. And when I click in the grid, it changes the resource details to the one that I'm interested in. And it also highlights your selection on the map with the halo. And in this case, there's quite a few there. So you want to know exactly what you're looking for. This is where the navigation in the details panel is helpful. If you click center and center zoom, it'll bring you in and you're able to see what your selection was. And one thing that's important to note is once you have your selection made, you need to go back to the tools panel, click pan map. And that's how you can look around. You can see what's around your selection. If you're zooming in and looking more at the location of what's in your selection, you can zoom back out and recenter. This will be how you navigate on the map while you have a selection in place. It's very important because if you try and navigate around with a select by box still in place, you're just going to end up with another selection. Another option, say we want to know what is within a 1/4 mile radius of this intersection here. We also have select by circle available. So you click at the center of where you want your circle to be, and you have 2 options. You can see that there's a measurement on the screen that will tell you how large your radius is. And so you can use that. Alternatively, you can also specify, which if you know exactly the radius that you're looking for, could be easier. So say I just need 1/10 of a mile. You click on the map, and where you click is the center of your circle. We also have select by polygon. And select by polygon is great if you need a more nuanced search selection. So one thing that can be helpful is if you're looking at a particular area, you could load the assessor parcels and then trace out your search by assessor parcel. You can get as detailed as you want or as less detailed as you want, but the select by polygon feature is there and available. We also have the option of measuring on the map, and we have a few different measurement types that you can do. You can measure an area, and your measurement will appear on the screen there. You could measure the length. So say we want to know the length of this road just from there. And again, it will appear on the map for you there. And you can either clear the measurements here, or if you head to clear selected features and measurements up top, it'll clear that for you. Okay, so we will restart back at the original view, and then we'll dive into a few more items that we find to be helpful. So one thing I like to call attention to is that we have a lot of data in MACRIS and in the MACRIS database. And what MACRIS Maps does is it helps folks to visualize that data. So we'll go back to Amherst, and this is a great example here. And we'll get select by click back so it's easier to navigate. So one thing that MACRIS Maps does is it easily displays the area boundaries. So if you're in Amherst, you may know that there's a local historic district and a few National Register districts, but you're not 100% sure where they start and end and if they overlap and information like that. So if you come to MACRIS Maps, you're able to see that. So if I hover over this, we'll pull up the map legend as well, just for reference. You'll see green is local historic district. So you're able to see that this area, this is the boundaries of the local historic district. You'll notice that this area and this area are red. So they are National Register districts. But you'll note, because of MACRIS Maps, you're able to see where they overlap, where those boundaries overlap. And we actually call attention to that in the symbology. And you'll note that an upside down red triangle indicates that the resource of interest is on both the National Register and within a local historic district. So that's what's handy about MACRIS Maps, is being able to actually visualize that data. Another thing that's exciting with the new MACRIS Maps, I know Pelham has some, is we have added the Massachusetts Historic Landmark designation. So looking here, you can see that this area has preservation restrictions, and then that these items have a Massachusetts Historic Landmark. But this is also a good time to have a discussion about designations on MACRIS Maps. So the designations on MACRIS Maps appear in a hierarchy. And it's important to know that if you're interested in a resource, that you should click on it and look in the details panel for the full information. So this one has a black star indicating that it has a preservation restriction. And when you're looking through MACRIS Maps in any town, a preservation restriction will always appear. It's the top of the hierarchy. But you'll see as it's clicked, it's, in addition to being a preservation restriction, it's also a Massachusetts Historic Landmark and within a National Register district. So you just have to click on the resource to get the full information. And same over here. This one does not have a preservation restriction on it, and therefore it's going to appear as a Massachusetts Historic Landmark. It's also within a National Register district. So paying attention to those details there. And then to finish off the presentation, I'd like to show a few helpful hints for MACRIS. So to start, I want to highlight that sometimes numbers are empty, they're skipped in the MACRIS database. And so if that's the case, MACRIS Maps will tell you the resource is not available in the database. So ABI2 just doesn't exist. There are also cases where a resource may be in the MACRIS database, but for one reason or another, it's not mapped. And the data or MACRIS Maps will also indicate that. So for example, here, the map does move, but you'll notice nothing's there. And so in the details panel, it says note no features available, or sorry, no coordinates available for this feature. And then another thing that does come up that I want to call attention to is you'll see over these three areas are overlapping. And when I'm hovering with my select by click tool, the only way that I'm able to highlight these two areas is that overlap with the local historic district is to go south of the district. where they're not overlapping anymore. But this won't always be the case. In some areas, they'll just have overlapping layers, and it may seem like you can't click it. That's the nature of the GIS overlapping layers in MACRIS Maps. However, that information is not inaccessible to you. Just go away from the select by click feature to box, circle, or polygon. And when you do that, you'll be able to access the data for all of those areas. And so you'll see here on the bottom that you can pull up the information for all of them that way. And then finally, I just like to show this as well. If you head to MassGIS 2019 ortho imagery, and then you overlay street names, it is very similar to Google Hybrid. And I know some folks like to use Google Hybrid because they like that aerial imagery along with the street name data. And while we don't offer Google Hybrid on MACRIS Maps, this is a great equivalent. You're able to see those street names as well as that aerial imagery. All right, and that covers everything that I wanted to go over for the introduction to MACRIS Maps. We'll head into questions. I know that there's a lot going on MACRIS Maps, and I definitely recommend pulling up the help document if you're new to this site and just having it open as you're browsing. I'm also always happy to answer questions. I'll have my contact information up at the end of the presentation. Feel free to take my email down, send me any questions, any trouble that you're having. And now we can open the floor up to the Q&A. All right, hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the presentation. We will go ahead and do a Q&A session now. And if you have any questions, please go ahead. It looks like we already have a few, but enter them in the Q&A box and then we'll get through as many as we can. Give me one moment. I'll share my contact information. All right. So looking at the Q&As to kick things off, the first question I see is, are the black and whites all compliant with HABS, HAER, HALS, or converted digital? Also, who provides those photos? I believe that this question is related to the photos that come up in the details panel. And with those, I'm not 100% sure if they are compliant. They're pulled from the MACRIS database. And, oh, there's a comment. Yes, details panel. So those photos are pulled from the MACRIS database, and they're scanned from the photos that are submitted with the inventory form. And they date as far back, often as the 1970s, up to today. The current photos that are submitted will be the photos that are in color. So I'm not 100% sure about the compliance, but that's a question that you could direct to folks at the MHC. And this is a good leeway into saying that I deal with the technical aspects of MACRIS Maps. And so I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can that relate to the MACRIS database and the MHC, but there may be cases like this where I'm not as familiar with all the details. So you could send that question on to MHC staff. And then we have MACRIS itself can be finicky. Is there any instance in which one would choose to use the original database instead of MACRIS Maps, especially considering the latter links to inventory forms on MACRIS? And this is a really good question. I would say that I'm actually going to go ahead and pull up MACRIS to answer this question. MACRIS and MACRIS Maps. And so using MACRIS maps is really great if you are looking to look at a town and you're doing, say, some kind of project where you need to know within a specific radius how many resources are there, or if you are familiar with a certain area. So say you just want this area, you could select that information and just say that you knew that this is exactly what you're looking for. So in this case, you wouldn't necessarily need to go to MACRIS Maps to the MACRIS database to know to get the complete list of the resources within that area. So if you'll see on the bottom right, there's an export selected tab to Excel. And this is a great question because I didn't have a chance to cover this in the video. You can export everything in your selection to an Excel spreadsheet. So you'll have a complete list of all the resources in that area. And this is similar to the list that you would export from the MACRIS database. And so in that case, you could use MACRIS Maps, no problem. But there are some cases where you might be doing a search that is a little more nuanced. And in that case, you would want to go to MACRIS. MACRIS Maps cannot filter your searches. So if you're looking specifically for buildings in a certain town that were constructed during a certain time period, that's definitely something that you would want to go to MACRIS for, because you can apply those filters and get that information there. Okay, another question is, how do you find out about demolished buildings and how readily is this status updated? So when you're looking for buildings that are demolished, you can see that information would be available in MACRIS if you looked up your MACRIS or MHC ID number. But if you are in MACRIS Maps, you can look down here in the grid, and on the left-hand side, if a building is demolished, it's going to have a Y in the column. Nothing here is demolished, so it's not there. And I cannot think of any offhand that are demolished, but you can take a look there and it'll tell you, but you should always try and confirm that with an outside source. We do our best. We typically mark buildings demolished if we have info from the local historic commission or like a newspaper article that confirms and has information about demolitions, but always double check that. But the preliminary information on MACRIS Maps can be found here. Another question similar to that, how can we update the status of structures that have been demolished? And that's great. If you have information on structures that have been demolished, go ahead and send an email to MHC staff, and it's you can find the email on the Massachusetts Historical Commission's website, but it's also mhc@state.ma.us. And just include the MACRIS ID number and the information that you have about if the structure has been demolished or if we've mistakenly marked it as demolished and you want to let us know that it's still standing. You can send information to that address or give MHC a call. We have, are the MACRIS maps available for free use in professional presentations and publications? So this map is, or this mapping application is free to the public. If you are going to use it in professional presentations or publications, we would just like a heads up and to be cited, and we could discuss further, but definitely shoot us an email and let us know. I don't foresee any issues with that, but giving us a little bit of notice would be great. I see, how do you get MACRIS updates and from whom? So the data that I'm working on the GIS end of things. So the information, the MHC information that you see on the map, I am adding based on information from inventory forms and inventory areas that are submitted to the Massachusetts Historical Commission. And so once that information is added to MACRIS, it comes to me and I'll add it into MACRIS Maps. And typically that information comes from consultants or folks who are looking to add properties to the National Register, or towns looking to create local historic districts. So it's coming from the historic preservation communities in Massachusetts. And so that one is how we get our updates. And then another question, is there a way to search by subject matter, by architect, or African-American history sites? And so I would love in the future for a filter like that to be available in MACRIS Maps. And I think that, you know, a little ways down the road, we might be able to do that. But for now, one thing that you could do is do that search in MACRIS, the MACRIS database. You can indeed search by an architect or by, I believe it's under ethnicity. So you could do a search there in MACRIS, and then once you get the ID numbers, you could come back and search them in MACRIS Maps. And then that way, if you want that visual piece of information to go along with the like historic name and construction date in MACRIS, you can come back with that. And then, is there any way to upload your own polygon or area of potential effect, as you can with the USDA's web soil survey? And so at present, we do not accept either shapefile submissions or submissions through MACRIS Maps. We just do the paper files. And then, is there any way to turn the designation layers on and off, for example, to see National Register properties only? And again, in the future, we'd love to have that filter available. It's something that we kind of have on our wish list. So stay tuned. Maybe in the next few years we can do that. But again, that's something where you could go to MACRIS, get your list of, say, just National Register properties in the town of Abington, and then you could come back and see it that way. And then one last question I see here is just noting a question is, when you do Street View, is it opening in a new tab? And the answer is yes. So here on the screen, you'll see we have this property in Adams up. I'll click Street View. And this is actually a great example. So this black screen is what will appear if Google doesn't have any imagery for the Street View. But that did open in a new tab. And so to get back to MACRIS Maps, we'll do that. Okay, just double checking this Q&A to make sure that we've covered everything. All right, so it looks like we've covered all the questions. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to leave my contact information up on the screen for about a minute or two, so you can jot that down. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today.